An inis bugger I guji Keshton in a January for boon or the Truckishe. Now moving on to take leaders' questions under Standing Order 36.
Gurmaigad Yaskan Korya agus Ahanish Hospital Niliani, tell you Molye, tell you Arigid, Hule Shrew agus and Realtis in the Galu, Lilinian Shaw, Eligig Chichimama. Tonish today are many years ago when Leo Varadkar was actually Minister for Health, he said, short of an asteroid hitting the planet, the National Children's Hospital would be built by 2020. Well, today we've learned that the fiasco continues in relation to the building of the National Children's Hospital as it spirals further out of control. The boards overseeing the project has told the Public Accounts Committee that the contractor has pushed out the completion date yet again for the hospital, this time to February 2025. And you know, Taoiseach, that after that date there's another 9 months to commission the hospital before it's ready to open and take in patients. The Chief Officer of the Board has told the committee that he can't even guarantee that that date will be met in the first instance. It is an absolute farce. And what have we learned today? We've learned that costs continue to spiral for the taxpayer, that no certainty when the hospital will be ready to treat patients, and promises that your government have given have been broken. And the safe bet now is that the hospital will not be open to patients until 2026. And Taoiseach, in the middle of all of this here, under your government's watch, there are 100,000 children languishing on waiting lists. On your government's watch, there are 251 children with scoliosis who are waiting for life-threatening, life-altering operations. It was to them that the now Taoiseach Simon Harris cynically gave that promise that he's broken over and over again, that none of them would have to wait more than 4 months for their life-changing treatment. A broken promise. And they need that hospital more than anyone. They need that hospital built. Taoiseach, the initial cost of this hospital was supposed to be €650 million. And now we learn that the cost has increased to more than €2.2 billion. And the board today, I don't know if you've seen it, the board actually couldn't guarantee that it wouldn't go higher. This is crazy stuff, Taoiseach. The government has lost all control in relation to the cost and the delivery of this project, and it is any wonder because your minister in your government is asleep at the wheel. This has been a slow-moving car crash from day one, and it is the Minister for Health and his predecessors who have been asleep at the wheel. Taoiseach, we've raised this issue over and over again. The last time I raised this with Taoiseach Leo Varadkar last year, he dismissed our concerns. When we warned that the project was a runaway train, that it required the Minister to roll up his sleeves to get duck in, to take a hands-on approach, he dismissed our concerns. He told me that the hospital would be treating patients this year. Another broken promise. The public, the taxpayer, the children waiting for this hospital cannot believe a word that comes from government when it comes to the National Children's Hospital, because every single target, every single financial cost has been broken, has been surpassed. And in any other walk of life, people would be held to account. But there's nobody being held to account. The board told the PAC earlier on that not one penalty has been lodged against the contractor because of the delays. Not one person is being held to account for this fiasco. Billions of euro of taxpayers' money being squandered in relation to the overruns in a hospital that is badly needed, and delay after delay after delay. And who's ultimately accountable for this failure? Taoiseach, I put it to you that your government are. That the person sitting beside you, the Minister for Health, who's completely asleep at the wheel, is accountable for this. Not once did he meet the board at all last year. Billions of euro, additional cheques being run, new dates after new dates, delay after delay, the board not even able to say if it'll open in 2025, and the Minister didn't meet the board once last year. That's how incompetent this government is. So can I ask you, Taoiseach, will your government and will your Minister accept responsibility for the fiasco that is the National Children's Hospital? And will you commit that the government will take action, that the Minister with responsibility will address this fiasco for once and for all?
Taoiseach to respond.
Ní an tíim leis an tara agus an rud is táchtaí nó go mé méid an hospital seo chríochnú agus go háirithe dáileáil go láidir le ban agus na dátaí atá good agus gachrod go banúsach tá bam freigrach as grothún an ospedéil seo. Agus tá dain séar ann thachta dála go bhfuil tusa ag gar agóint beidir nach bhfuil séar intan agat ach go bhfuil tú ag gar agóint a bharmhar ban. What I'm going to say to you, Deputy that you need to be very careful in the sense that you're not being used as a pawn in terms of a very strong and robust engagement between the National Paediatric Development Hospital Development Board, the government, and BAM. Because all the deadlines that you came through with there are deadlines that BAM set. And it's likely to be part of a commercial strategy by BAM to try and extract more funding and more money from the Irish people. Now, I put it to you very directly that I'm not going to take the bait, and I would suggest you don't take the bait either. And for the last number of years, there's been a very robust engagement through dispute resolute mechanisms. And you will cite hundreds of millions that have been submitted in respect of claims. But when you actually look at the net outcome of those claims, it's a fraction of the overall cost of the hospital. In other words, there has been a very robust, tenacious engagement between the contractor, the company in this case, the development board, through the various arbitration methods. And that, unfortunately, the bottom line is BAM has not resourced this project sufficiently for quite some time. And the only way, and I would call on BAM to resource the site adequately and comprehensively to enable this hospital to be completed as fast as we possibly can. And the government is fair and is dealing with this in a fair manner, but we're not going to say finish this at any cost or throw to one side proper procedural approaches as to how claim and counterclaim gets resolved and how contracts get enforced. And I think that's an important point. All of those deadlines these have all been submitted by BAM at different times. Now, I'm not sure whether you're saying we should go straight into the High Court or the Supreme Court and suspend all work on the project. I don't know if that's your suggestion to government. Our objective is to get the hospital completed as quickly as we possibly can. BAM has submitted about 2,782 claims, of which 2,182 have been substantiated at a value of approximately 785 million. And that's the value assigned by BAM. I hastily add. Approximately 1,890 of those claims have been determined by the ER, with the net result being an increase to the contract sum of approximately 22.8 million. So in respect of BAM submitting by the Ornicon 785, we've arbitrated every one of them. That takes time, tenacity, but that's how we're doing it. And we're going to, in the first instance, make sure the taxpayer gets value for money, but we also want the hospital completed as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. And we're not going to roll over into contractual engagements with BAM, as you seem to be suggesting that we do. And this hospital is urgently required for the children of Ireland. It will be transformative compared to what we currently have in Crumlin or Temple Street. Of that, there is no doubt. And there has been, significant advancements in the project. Of that, there is no doubt. And I think you didn't, quote the comments from the chair of the board in respect of what has been, of the current update in terms of, all the tower cranes have been removed from the site and so on.
Those words really came out of your mouth, that your government is determined that the taxpayer will get value for money in terms of the National Children's Hospital. Are you serious? It's gone from 650 million up to 2.2 billion, and the chair of the board can't guarantee that it won't go higher. If you want an example of government incompetence, then look no further than the National Children's Hospital. Cost blooming, taxpayer paying the bill, delay after delay after delay, every single target missed, and we have a minister over there that didn't meet with the board once last year. Not once last year, because he's asleep at the wheel. He thinks it's somebody else's problem. But the cheques keep on getting written and children keep on getting denied the hospital that they deserve. And that's the problem. That's the problem. You are completely asleep at the wheel. I'll ask you a very simple question. Because the board can't guarantee this, will that hospital start treating patients before 2016? Because the Taoiseach stood there last year and he started saying you were being used as a pawn and all of the rest, when we were saying you needed to take a hard approach with the contractor, that the minister needed to get involved in this here, that the government needed to use their muscle, and they said no, everything's fine. They said patients would be treated this year. Patients aren't going to be treated this year. The target is moved again. The board can't guarantee the target, and the likelihood is no patient will be treated in that hospital by 2016. 2026, sorry.
you raise an issue, remember, on the ventilation grills, and your claims tens of millions would be required. Subsequently turned out not to be the case. And the point I would make to you is this. Inadvertently, or whether it's your intention or not, you're a pawn now of, in my view, of where the contractor wants this to go. That's what's going on here. The contractor has been delaying, has not been resourcing the project properly or comprehensively, is hoping there will be this kind of a engagement in Dáil to keep pressure on the government and the politicians to yield a bit quicker, give us a bit more in terms of the claims that we've made. And you're playing that game, Deputy. And all the timelines have been BAM timelines. They're not, I'm through the chair, they're not government timelines, they're BAM timelines now. In respect of the October, deadline, through the chair, that's a BAM deadline. And all of, even this morning, what the chair is saying, BAM are indicating, you said it yourself, BAM are indicating. So I think the Oireachtas should back the government in being resolute on this issue with the contractor,
Thank you,
and not fall for the game that's being played in terms of commercial strategy.
Thank you. I'm moving on.
Deputy Doherty. One up in your research office, right?
Can we move on? I'm moving on, please. With respect, can we listen to each other? Deputy Keane O'Callaghan, Social Democrats.
Margaret Laskin Corla, Taoiseach, I want to ask you about Children's Disability Network teams. Madison Marr is 7 years old. She lives in the north side of Dublin. Maddie has an autism diagnosis. She is non-verbal and has a moderate learning disability. Maddie's assessment of need was carried out when she was just 3 years old. Since then, she has not been offered any of the necessary supports from the Children's Disability Network team. She is on a waiting list for speech and language therapy, a waiting list for occupational therapy, a waiting list for physiotherapy. She has never been offered any appointment. She has no estimated time frame on when she will be offered an appointment. She has spent half her young life on waiting lists without getting any support. She now has severe problems with her feet and is likely to require surgery because of the complete lack of early intervention. Taoiseach, as you know, timely intervention in these early years is of critical importance. Maddie's mother has lost all hope in the Children's Disability Network team. She's at her wit's end trying to get the support that her daughter urgently needs. They've been passed around and told that staff shortages are why their daughter has been left without any support. Maddie urgently needs supportive therapies and a long-term care plan. She urgently needs a further assessment to use an alternative communications device. She urgently needs to be seen by a clinical nurse specialist. Taoiseach, Maddie is not the only child being systematically failed by the state. There are thousands out there like her. Each child and family is enduring pain, trauma and almost constant anxiety. Parents who have to watch their children suffer every day are in a living hell. They know that there are therapies which could transform their children's lives, but they can't access them. And they don't know if they ever will. All of their interactions with the state agencies end in the same way, waiting lists and broken promises. Taoiseach, we know that more than 1/3 of the approved posts in Children's Disability Network teams are not filled. That means more than 700 vacant positions, with some teams experiencing staff shortages of 60 and even 70%. How can any service operate with staff vacancy rates at those levels? The government promised a new recruitment plan would finally start to address this crisis. In April, Minister Anne Rabbitte told this House that the latest recruitment drive concluded in January and there had been 495 applications. So, Taoiseach, my questions are, nearly 5 months after the latest recruitment drive ended, how many of those 495 applicants have been hired? When will the Children's Disability Network teams be properly staffed and resourced? And when, Taoiseach, will Maddie get the interventions and supports that she urgently needs?
First of all, I think Maddie is the child's name, and I think it's not acceptable that we don't have sufficient early intervention teams in place for children at an early age, because I accept the principle that early intervention makes a profound difference in a child's life and in the outcome for a child in terms of any particular need or issue that the child may have. The Cabinet agreed last week to accelerate an assessment of need waiting list initiative through the procurement of private assessment for long waiting families, with about 2,300 assessment of needs being funded and an additional allocation of about 11 million euro, and that is to specifically deal with the assessment of need issue. And there also has been, as you have said, a substantial recruitment campaign run by the HSE in respect of the CED-NT teams, and 165 new job offers have now emerged from that particular competition. And there has been an issue in respect of recruitment more generally, notwithstanding the fact that over the last 3 budgets, funding had been allocated for almost 800 whole-time equivalent posts in our CD&T teams across the country. We've also provided about 227 additional training places for health and social care professionals, and the number of training psychological posts have been increased to 45 posts per annum for the next 3 years. And we will continue to do everything we can to both deal with the assessment of need issue, and there was the recent High Court decision, and we're going to have to, and I think the Oireachtas will have to examine that in terms of getting a system in place that facilitates a meaningful but more timely assessment of need process for children. But also in addition to that then, that there would be proper multidisciplinary teams with wide geographic reach to intervene and to provide interventions on a continuous basis to children who require them. The assessment of need regional hubs have been rolled out across the country. They're operational. They're undertaking a assessment of need assessments. And Minister Abbott would have met with the 9 CHO heads of disability services monthly to monitor and discuss the progress in tackling that overall assessment of need backlog issues. And of course, disability services has a derogation in respect of recruitment and so on. There's no issue there. But in the short term, to answer your question, we have made this additional allocation last week from the Cabinet of 11 million to accelerate assessment of needs for up to 2,300, maybe close to 2,500.
Taoiseach, I wasn't asking you about assessment of needs. I was giving you the specific example of a child who was assessed, was referred to a Children's Disability Network team, and has been waiting for half her life, got no supports, none of the services or therapies that she needs, and is now in severe difficulty as a result of that. So if you could answer that question. You've said that there's 165 job offers made. That's out of 800 additional posts that you said are approved and 700 existing vacancies. 165 job offers is not going to cut it. Taoiseach, Maddie has waited half her life for supports she urgently needs. She is suffering as the result of the lack of intervention. She's now likely going to need surgery as a result. She cannot afford to wait any longer, and there are thousands of children in the same situation being referred to teams that seem not to exist and services that they're promised but fail to materialise. So when are they going to get the supports that they need, and when are these empty posts going to be filled, and when are you going to properly resource Children's Disability Network teams?
Come on.
Very significant, as you referenced yourself, recruitment campaign, which so far has resulted in 165 new job offers for CD&T teams. I said it to you earlier. That's so far. That is so far, and the HSE are going to repeat the recruitment campaign with a view to offering more positions in this area to ultimately properly resource the CD&T teams. I also believe there needs to be a look on a human resource management perspective to make sure that people recruited into the CD&T teams have an environment which is conducive, which incentivises, and which makes for sustainable career pathways into the future. I think there has been an issue in terms of attracting the multidisciplinary teams and various social and healthcare staff into the CD&T teams, maybe in some cases because of the burden of workload and so on. And I've met with people myself and providers on this very specific issue. And so the recruitment is a key part of it, but also once we recruit, that the quality of the environment is such. Pathways into the future.
Is féidir an bugger a an iscatí an tríú ceist in anam an teach the Brid Smith.
Last Ceann Comhairle. Tánaiste, I don't know, and maybe you don't want to answer this, maybe you do. If you do the shopping in your house, if you go to the grocery and fill the trolley with all the food that's required for the week, and if you do, have you noticed how steep the prices have risen for ordinary grocery products in the last year? They say there's no inflation in 2024, at least it's dropping severely, but actually the price of basic foodstuffs is still rising. And as of April 2024, the cost of potatoes increased by 17.3%, rice by 10.6%, olive oil by 23.5%, frozen vegetables by 10.7%. And that list of goodies really equals what a normal average and low-paid household would basically shop on. Your basic foodstuffs, none of your caviar or your fresh crab meat, just ordinary foodstuffs that families depend on. And if you haven't noticed, I certainly have, because every time I go shopping, I look for the receipt to compare prices over a period of time. Because I know from talking to neighbours and people in my area, the cost of foodstuffs is crippling them. And the Bernardo's survey that was published has backed that up absolutely clearly. More than 1 in 4 parents don't have enough food to feed their children at some point in the last year. And that's up by 1 in 5 from 2022. 1 in 5 say they're regularly unable to afford a main meal, a main dinner for their family and children. And almost half of parents said that they worry about having enough food for their children. What a disgraceful statistic in one of the richest countries in the world. And why is it happening? Well, it's happening for a number of reasons. One is that when inflation over the last 3 years has been at 20%, and particularly on foodstuffs still rising, incomes have not risen to that degree, not near it. 7% on average for whether you're working or whether you're on social protection. 7%, 20%, that's a real pay cut, a real income cut of 13% for ordinary households who spend more of their income on average than the likes of you and me do, because we have a much higher income than them. And the other issue is profits. Profits are soaring. An ECB report on this issue said that profit margin increases contributed hugely to the cost of living increases. And if you look at the profits, Tesco's, a shop well known for its inflated prices on ordinary grocery stuffs, their operating profits were 120 plus million for 2023. SuperValu saw an increase of 4.7 billion during 2022. And Musgrave's profit margins increased. And then, of course, we have the banks, with AIB having an exceptional profit margin of 2 billion. DSB's profits rose for 8.6 million.
Deputy.
I can't square that circle. I'm against capitalism. I'm an anti-capitalist. I'm for a more egalitarian system. You're pro-capitalist. You eulogise it all the time. Now, can you square that circle for me, please?
First of all, I don't eulogise capitalism. And you said you're for a different system, but I think you probably should be a bit more transparent. I think you believe in a socialist 100% economy model, which I don't think would have created the full employment that we have in this country today. And I think your approach to multinational companies, yesterday you said we should boycott Intel, Hewlett-Packard, and by implication Intel as well, in terms of the comments that you made. And there are thousands of people working in those companies in this country. And they need to be working to meet cost of living issues and to provide for their families. And I would respectfully suggest through the Chair that the economic model that you present is one that would undermine the capacity of many families in this country to provide for their children and their families, because I think it would suck investment out of the country and wouldn't enable us to have the reserves that we have to distribute funding to those who most need it. And, you know, in our household, I do a bit of the shopping, don't do the full shopping because I have my own sort of, I go once a week to the market and I get the porridge and I'll get the fruit and so on like that. And the costs have increased. And my tastes aren't everybody's tastes, by the way. But that said, but the point I would make is the costs have increased, but we have, through the budget, worked very hard to try and deal with the cost of living, because there was a big inflation increase in the last 2 years, starting with the war in Ukraine and the rebound from COVID, and that did hit people, and it has hit people hard. Energy prices went up significantly, food prices went up significantly. So we're very conscious of that, and that is why, you know, Budget 24 provided a €12 increase in weekly social welfare pension rates. There was increased thresholds for the working family payment so that more families could qualify. Extension of child benefit to 18 years old in full-time education. The free book scheme for junior cycle students. We now have free book schemes for all primary kids and up to junior certificate, and hope to extend that. The hot school meals initiative as well, which has been very extensively expanded. The extension of the fee reduction of school transport services for a further year. €1,000 reduction in fees and increased grants for third level students. You know, the fees waived for students sitting state exams, and so on. There was a further 25% reduction in childcare costs. Over half the population are now entitled to free GP care. We abolished hospital inpatient charges and the other charges also, and reduced the threshold in respect of the drug payments scheme. And we brought in a rent tax credit. So there has been, I think, an unprecedented number of measures taken to try and ease the undoubted increase in costs that people have experienced. And the Bernardus report, I think, does indicate that there was the Silk data of 2003 showed an overall decrease in consistent poverty from 4.9% in Silk 22 to 3.6% in Silk 2023. We need to do more.
Deliberately on the cost of groceries, because that is my argument. Food inflation is crippling people, and the Bernardo's report shows that Social Justice Ireland have shown that more than 500,000 people in this country are living in poverty, of which 180,000 are children. And I'm asking you, what are you going to do about the rising cost of food? You can go shopping in some market and buy your porridge and fruit, but most people do rely on the Tesco's and the Aldi's and the Lidl's, where food inflation is still rising, and there's no sign of it stopping. Now, we introduced a bill to introduce price controls on both energy on one bill and introduce price controls on food. Now, that will not see the light of day because of the ethos of the government, who will not interfere with a market when profits are going through the roof and poverty levels are increasing and the divide in this society is increasing, the 1% at the top getting much, much richer. For example, the CEO of Tesco, the Irish CEO, a man called Murphy, his earnings last year were 417 times the average Tesco workers at 1.9 million. That is the sort of country we live in, and that is the sort of country when parents let their kids go to bed hungry, the sort of country that they're facing. What are you going to do about addressing that problem?
You're not the only one that goes to the various shops that you talk about. And don't create the impression that you're the only person that goes to Tesco in this house. I've been in Tesco. I've been in Super Value. Right? But I also... No, but you made a snide comment through the chair. And I'm just saying to you, every deputy in this house, you don't have a monopoly on these things, deputy. That's the only point I'm making. And I go to a local market. Why? Because I thought you'd be agreeable that we should look after local producers. So the local person who produces the eggs in Ballycotton, I have no problem in buying the eggs from that person to support local people on the ground in our communities who are doing an extra bit of work and so on like that, and keep the local economy working as best we can. But the point I would make is this: that I've acknowledged the increase in the cost of food prices as well as energy. And that is why we did some unprecedented stuff in respect of trying to give people money back to try and deal with the undoubted increase in cost of living. It has increased. And that's why the 400 lump sum Once-off payments were made in the working family payment to about 45,000 families with 97,000 children. 409,000 households got €300 fuel allowance lump sum. 100 per child lump sum to families in respect of 370,000 qualified children. Double child benefit payment for 1.2 million children. And I think we should acknowledge that, Deputy. Like, the government did respond.
Thank you. Joan Collins.
Taoiseach, I do not think anyone was surprised by the failures of your government's housing policy laid out in last week's report on the Housing Commission. I see those failures every day in my constituency office, people struggling to pay rent, to find a home, people stuck in the housing list 16 to 18 years, people stuck in homelessness. The desperation out there is a direct result, to my opinion, of the housing policies implemented by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, supported by Labour and the Greens for decades, not for 10 years like your Minister made a point earlier on, but on by 50 years failed policy. The report calls for an increase of our social housing stock to 20% of all housing stock. We used to have over 20% of social housing stock. We built tens of thousands of homes when this country was practically broke. The report is calling for a return to what we had before your party decided to turn our housing policy into a failed policy to allow the big banks and developers to make profit and not providing homes for ordinary people. Nowhere is this failure clearer than in the rental sector. Average rents have more than doubled from 2012 to 2022. And I can assure you, Taoiseach, wages did not double in that time. You stood by and allowed rents to eat more and more into people's pay packets and more into people's standard of living. And what do people get for up to $2,500 rent or more a month? A rental sector where housing standards are not properly inspected, rent controls that, according even to the Housing Commission, are not properly enforced, a clear lack of security of tenure in which you fulfil all your obligations as a tenant and can still be turfed out, and a serious lack of protections from illegal evictions which have become endemic in our rental sector. The Housing Commission has clear recommendations for the rental sector, and I want to focus on one, Taoiseach, that is facilitating sales of rental properties with tenants in situ. Quoting from Section 6 of the report, to facilitate sales with tenants in situ, the rent regulations need to be reformed as rental evaluations, which will be an important component in valuing the overall selling price of a property. In addition, mortgages for the purchase of private rented dwellings would need to allow purchases with tenants in situ. This is a clear solution to one of the biggest problems that faces renters, the lack of security of tenure, and it would go a long way into ending no-fault evictions and securing renters in their homes. This is standard for commercial property. If it is good enough for businesses, it should be good enough for people's homes. I would go further and say that there should be no evictions ever because of sale of a property, and that's in my party's housing policy. Will the government follow the recommendations of the Housing Commission and facilitate sales of rental properties with tenants in situ? That is the question I'm asking.
First of all, so we have a very extensive tenant in situ programme, and it's been very effective.
Not according to the Commission.
It's been very effective, and Minister Darabine introduced that well over, I suppose, nearly 2 years at this stage now, and it's been very successful and effective in terms of preventing evictions and giving the option, or going to the seller in this case and saying the council will buy the house, and enable the person to continue on as a tenant of the council onwards. And it's been very effective. I think it's maybe potentially up to 1,800. I get the most up-to-date figure that have been approved so far. The key, and by the way, the government appointed the Housing Commission and tasked them with examining long-term housing policy. And of the 83 recommendations, 65 are already advanced or at varying stages of implementation, with some more advanced than others, and comprehensive consideration is being given to the recommendations. I'm not sure whether you agree with the recommendations of the Housing Commission in respect of the rental market in terms of maybe changing the RPZs and moving to a different system in terms of reference areas. I think there would be some complexity to that, but we will examine that. Because it's the government working with many in the Oireachtas who pushed for the the RPZ system, which it seems that the Housing Commission has described as reactive. So the political system, not just government, has been very anxious to intervene in the rental market on an ongoing basis. On a preliminary reading, it seems to me that the Housing Commission is reflecting on that and suggesting that maybe the Oireachtas should be less reactive. But that's a debate no doubt we'll have in the House. Because whereas everyone has kind of focused on the highlight opening sort of chapter of the Housing Commission, there's been precious little confirmation from anyone in the House as to do they agree specifically with aspects of the Housing Commission's report, particularly in respect of the rental market. And I would be interested in parties opposite to come forward with substantive views on what, in terms of the substance of some of the recommendations themselves, particularly in terms of the rental market. In terms of the Social Housing Act, for example, that's not something that's going to happen overnight. One would have to examine again in detail, because it's a comprehensive report, what is envisaged. I note that my understanding is the Housing Commission don't believe that tenants of local authority housing should have the right to buy a tenant purchase, for example. And the reasons advanced to that is that they want to increase forever the existing housing stock within by local authorities. Now, the system currently, I think we have about 50% of new builds in social housing is built by approved social housing bodies who don't allow for tenant purchase. But I'm not clear if there's consensus within the Oireachtas that tenant purchase should be ruled out completely.
Thank
and
you,
again, we'll examine that, and I'm sure there's nuances within the report in the Commission as well. And it does deserve comprehensive examination.
Thank you.
Taoiseach, thanks for your reply, but didn't answer my question. The situation in Ireland is that 5,000 people have entered emergency accommodation since the ban on no-fault evictions was lifted last year. Terminations rose by 20% after the ban was lifted. More than 19,000 households issued with eviction notices last year. We have record homelessness. More than 100 families in Ireland became homeless in the last 3 months of 2023 due to no-fault evictions. And for 63% of eviction notices last year, the reason given was sale of the property. So the Housing Commission is making a point here that that should not be the case. Focus Ireland called this the evict to sell crisis. So what the Housing Commission is raising here is that no, you shouldn't be forced to leave that house for the sale of the home. Like in commercial businesses, I've seen apartments above businesses and they sell with the person in situ. So that's what they're raising here from that point of view. And I'm asking this government, do you support that? There should be no fault evictions for people who are actually paying their rent, keeping the house up to standards, and then landlords decide they want to sell and get rid of those tenants out of the house. And that has to change, and that's what the Housing Commission are referring to here. That was the question I was asking.
Well, it seems to me, I don't think they're recommending no fault eviction. No, the Housing Commission is not. No, they're not saying that here. They're saying regulate market rents fairly and effectively by reforming the current system of rent regulation and establishing a system of reference rents. And this reform should be informed by evidence-based reviews on the impact of regulated market rents on rented housing supply, accessibility and affordability. And such reviews should be conducted on a regular basis. Reform and consolidate standards for rented dwelling to a single nationwide dwelling standards. That's fine. Amend the standards for rental accommodation and private cost rental homes. Regulate the landlord functions of local authority-owned dwellings, formalise the local authority-tenant relations, and implement reforms to ensure a more effective enforcement model. That's all fine. And so it is, yeah. And I've gone through the rental, but I don't see any reference to a ban on no-fault evictions. It seems to me that they want a significant reform of the existing rental market regulation. And I think that's going to take a significant degree of work. Meanwhile, the government is absolutely committed to the tenant in situ scheme, as we have demonstrated in terms of buying houses where people are at risk of eviction, going to the council and saying, council, you buy the house and keep the person in the house.
Thank you. So it's federal and bugger Ryan Ishkuji policy on realtas no raktiok to Togyalta, Ibrahim and Chakta.
I'll try again, but look, the Taoiseach never gives a direct answer, and I asked him a very simple question. You know, after spending €2.2 billion, complete incompetence from the government in the National Children's Hospital, he can't even tell us whether he believes that the hospital will be open to treat children by 2026. That was a very simple question. I'll try again in relation to maybe your other fiasco here, which is the housing crisis, which is of a crippling effect on society. Many unable to find a home, a place to live, and today we have the ESRI report, Taoiseach, reporting on the impact of this crisis on a particular group of people, that is children. The report found that inadequate cold and damp housing has long-term impacts on the physical and mental health of children, while their mothers experiencing and living in inadequate housing tend to have higher levels of depression, worse health outcomes, damaging knock-on effects on their children, and children are so often the victims of your housing policies. So can I ask you, do you accept the findings of the SRI report that your housing crisis is having an effect on the mental health of children and the physical health of children? How do you stand over that, and what do you say to those families and their children today?
First of all, the SRI report, as you know, is based on children born in 2008 and assesses them over a 9-year period. And without question, quality of housing does impact on children and on families' well-being. And that is why we're building more social housing this year and over the last 3 years. And this government has, notwithstanding COVID-19 lockdowns, has substantially changed the dial in respect to house completions. And we've also done far more than any of our government in terms of retrofitting of local authority housing to make quality housing better, and also retrofitting more generally, where there's been a dramatic increase in the retrofitting of houses across the country, which goes to the heart of the ESRI report, better quality housing more generally, both in the rental market, local authority housing and housing more generally. And that's the way to deal with it. And without doubt, since 2020 now, post-COVID, there's been a dramatic increase. 110,000 houses additionally have been delivered, but we need to do much more.
Thank you. Portian looked over at Bacik.
We hear ominous reports from the Israeli government that they intend to continue pursuing their genocidal war in Gaza until the end of this year and beyond, while they refuse to comply with the International Court of Justice ruling calling for an immediate halt to the military offensive in Gaza. We see children continuing to be killed in Gaza. We see what is happening in Rafah now, which is horrific and a stain on our humanity. And Taoiseach, we need concrete action at EU level. So I'm asking, will your government support Ursula von der Leyen for a second term, even if she refuses to apply sanctions to Israel, even if she refuses to review the EU trade agreement? In a week's time, Ireland goes to vote in the European elections, and only a vote for Labour candidates will deliver MEPs who will be members of the second largest group in the European Parliament, the Socialists and Democrats group. Only that group can challenge Ursula von der Leyen and the EPP for a second term. So I'm asking, will you continue to back Ursula von der Leyen, even in light of her undue support for Israel?
Well, first of all, Deputy, I think you should acknowledge that one of the more stronger MEPs on the Palestine question over the last 4 years has been Barry Andrews and Billy Kelleher. They've been very robust. They've visited the area. They've been very strong in respect of upholding the right of Palestinians to their homeland and to a state, and having a fair resolution of the conflict there. And in respect of it is shocking that Israel is indicating this morning that this war could go to the end of the year. The suffering is horrific, and the consequences are dire for Palestinians across Gaza, and particularly in Rafah at the moment. And that is why at the last Foreign Affairs Council meeting on Monday, that there was a call, which I supported with the proviso, that there would be a convening of the EU-Israel Association Council with raising our grave concerns about what's happening. In terms of subsequent elections, subsequent European institutions, a lot will depend on what happens in the European Union parliamentary elections.
Taoiseach, many parents in Wicklow rely on Tala Emergency Hospital for their children at the moment. Indeed, I've often made the journey in the hard shoulder frantically with my child, bring them to emergency over there where they get excellent care. When the new children's hospital is opened, the Tala emergency will close for children, and it will be an urgent care centre, a daytime provision, and it will close, I think, at 8 o'clock every day. So parents in Wicklow will have to bring their child for any emergency care into St James's. Can you tell me, because we hear now that the handover will happen in 2025. The handover will happen in 2025. That's what's been mooted. How many months will it be from that point to when the Tallaght emergency will close for children in Wicklow? How many months will it be following that point when the Tallaght emergency will close for children in Wicklow? I think many parents in Wicklow don't realise that the Tallaght paediatric service will close once the St James's Hospital is open.
Once the new Children's Hospital is open,
Yes.
you're saying, yeah. But again, I think the Minister for Health can engage on that more specific issue, but the more fundamental point I would make, as just well, I think I have to take the first four, I think, or from leaders. But I'm going to give you the answer now, because you asked 2 or 3 questions. I think the first was the timeline. Yeah, sorry.
Emergency service closed is my question.
In the first instance, it is too. It's not. We're not in a position to determine that right now. I'm long enough around to know in health that situations evolve, and rarely do facilities close. They either get redeployed or used for something else, or they get kept on as they are. But obviously the whole idea of a National Children's Hospital is to have the best care and the most appropriate care for children with particular conditions and so on like that. So the point I would make is all of these timelines have been BAM timelines, and I'm resolutely refusing to become involved in an arbitration process that's ongoing and a very difficult contractual relationship now between the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board and BAM.
Dr. Palmer.
Ask Ken Corla. Taoiseach, why is your government increasing tax on workers? This afternoon, in the social welfare bill, the tax, the employees' PRSI, is going to be increased from 4% to 4.7%, the most regressive form of income tax that we have, which will mean that a worker on a minimum wage will end up paying almost an extra €200 in PRSI. A worker on the average wage will pay almost €350 extra in PRSI. Why are workers being hit in this way when the government has just introduced a tax break in terms of employers' PRSI? You're acting like a reverse Robin Hood, taking from the workers and giving to the rich corporations. This is not necessary to fund the pay-related job seekers' benefit. Your own tax strategy group found that Ireland's employers' PRSI is less than half the EU average. That's what should be increased.
PRSI has been increased. Has been increased. Employers' PRSI has been increased. And the Social Insurance Fund is extremely important for the future. Overall, government has reduced taxes, by the way, on workers. Significantly reduced taxes on workers, and through national wage agreements and so on, with inflation coming right down now as it has this year, the rate of inflation, the result will be net incomes will increase overall, and taxes come down every year since this government came into office, in terms of income tax and in terms of the universal the USC as well. The Commission on Taxation was very clear that in order to sustain pensions into the future, auto enrolment into the future, pay-related benefits into the future, that we should make sure that we have a significant revenue base for that.
During your recent visit to the community around Lough Funchina, you witnessed the devastating impact of rising water levels. These levels have now exceeded all previous records, and without intervention, it's predicted that 4 homes will be lost to the floodwaters next winter. Now, as you know, Taoiseach, the Geological Survey of Ireland, in its most recent modelling, has confirmed this dire situation. Additionally, research published last week by the World Weather Attribution indicates that increased winter rainfall driven by climate change will become more frequent, and this exacerbates the risk to these 4 homes. Now, given this compelling evidence, I'd urge you, Taoiseach, to request an urgent re-evaluation by the Attorney-General of the legal options available to protect these vulnerable homes in advance of next winter.
Yes, I thank the Deputy for raising the question, and I did visit the area and met with many residents, and it's quite shocking what the residents in this area have gone through. And it's an awful pity that that pipeline, which was 60% completed, was not enabled to go the full distance, because as a human disaster has unfolded and continues to unfold, for the residents of that area. It was heartrending to see, and it's even as you walk there, the levels haven't gone down in some areas, and everybody's afraid of next winter. And you're correct. In terms of the climate attribution study by the World Weather Attribution Group, and a key finding of the study that has identified an increase of about 20% in rainfall intensities experienced during the period from October 2023 to March 2024. And the big fear is this is not once off anymore. And so therefore, two things. I think the council should proceed with the planning properly, get all the studies in and keep doing that. That will not sort it out for this winter. And therefore, I will revert back to the Attorney General in respect of legal advices around what can be done in the short term. But I'm clear that something has to happen in the short term in respect of this.
Thank you. The independent, Joan.
Thanks, last count caller. Taoiseach, I was asked to ask this question by representatives of the Dublin Monaghan bombings. On the 21st of May 1975, then Deputy Tom J. Fitzpatrick replied to a question in the Dáil, speaking of the Garda Síochána investigation into the Dublin Monaghan bombing, said, "They have no positive information or evidence that would clearly identify the culprits. We know there were eyewitness accounts from the day placing a certain loyalist in a car in Dublin that day. His photo was then picked out of evidence books. On at least one occasion, a Garda representative was present at an RUC interrogation of a loyalist in which names relating to the bombings were discussed. In 1983, the 1993 Yorkshire First Tuesday documentary, journalist Philip Tibbenham states, all ministers on the Irish Government Security Committee interviewed by First Tuesday say they were never told the Gardaí had any suspects for the bombings. So the question, last count caller, the Government Security Committee was briefed by Garda on the investigations into the bombings, which members of the Garda briefed that Security Committee that they had no suspects. Taoiseach, will you hand over this information to the relatives when you meet them after the local elections? That's the information they're looking for.
Yeah, but first of all, I think there's a number of steps to this. I was at the commemoration of 50, which was very poignant, very sad, and without question, we need to get answers for the relatives here. And it has to be done through a structured format. And I met recently with Sir Ian Livingston of Operation Denton, who took over from John Boucher. I think the publication of Operation Denton is important in this context, and I hope will shed further light on what happened on that terrible day and in advance of that terrible day and subsequent to it. And I would hope that would create a platform for further actions then by the two governments in respect of the Dublin Monaghan bombings. And that's where I see it at the moment, and I will obviously meet the residents, or sorry, the victims, the families of the victims, and we'll engage with them in terms of how best we can move forward on this. And that will include, in terms of our own state, any information that either the Department of Justice or in Garda Síochána have should, of course, be made available. Now, the Barron report identified that there was missing documentation from the British government, rendered it impossible to be conclusive in respect of it. And the McEntee report, which was also established, came to similar conclusions.
Deputy, thank you.
Thank you. Taoiseach, this time last year you hosted and generously hosted a very successful Trade Northern Ireland event in Ivy House. This is an alliance between Hospitality Ulster, Manufacturing Northern Ireland and Regional Northern Ireland. Last week they held the same trade event in Westminster, and again the Irish Embassy generously hosted them in the Irish Embassy that evening. And on the 25th of June they are again in Ivy House, and I believe you're hosting them again. Taoiseach, we need to do an awful lot more of this. There's other organisations such as CHAMP, such as Anglo-Irish Relations and that. And I just want to ask, what are your views on expanding many of these organisations and hosting many of these organisations, because they do an awful lot for north-south, east-west cooperation?
Thanks, the Deputy, for raising the issue, and I do recall the event in Ivy House last year. It's extremely important because many businesses and people who employ people in Northern Ireland were very insightful and enlightening in respect of the Brexit situation and how various responses by governments, both UK government, could negatively impact on the Irish government, on their everyday working environments. And it's extremely important that we continue to nurture and cultivate more and more engagements with organisations such as this, particularly in respect of Northern Ireland, because sometimes people have general notions and ideas, but it's when you meet the people who are in the field and who are doing the work that you can learn a lot and then apply that learning to policy. And Vice President Sefcovic of the European Commission, for example, had tremendous interaction with the Brexit Business Working Group in Northern Ireland, and that did help change attitudes within the Commission, which led to the Windsor Framework Agreement.
Thank you, Tánaiste, very much. Mark Ward.
I want to bring your attention to the lack of services in Dublin Midwest. So I have a constituent from Condalkin who needs a mobility scooter. He's been told that he has to wait 37 months for an occupational therapist appointment in Rolla. In Newcastle, we have no public health nurses for one housing estate, but we have for the housing estate beside it, and it's the same in North Condalkin. And finally, we have no special educational needs officer for Condalkin. I have families who are desperately trying to get a special educational school place for their child with little or no assistance. So, Tánaiste, I have 3 questions. Do you think it's unacceptable for a person needing a mobility scooter having to wait 3.5 years for an appointment? Do you think it's unacceptable that children are not receiving developmental checks? And do you think it's unacceptable for parents of children with disabilities to have no support in finding a school place?
Well, first of all, children should have support in respect of finding school places. I'm not clear as to why there's no CNO in the area. Is that a recruitment issue, or is it because that's a matter for the NCSE, and there's CNOs across the length and breadth of the country? But there will be, I presume. Is that it?
The time is running out for the answer.
Yeah, but if we ring NCSE, will tell us what the story is. I mean, I presume there will be. Or maybe someone has left the job or whatever. I'm not sure. We need to get the background of that. Then the mobility scope, my own view is aids and appliances and any supports should be provided relatively seamlessly. The system that the HSE operates at times in different parts of the country baffles me. Because extraordinary additional funding has been allocated to the HSE over the last 3 years, and mobile scooters shouldn't be an issue financially. And no one should be waiting. Nobody should be waiting 27 months.
Thank you.
It's just ridiculous. The third point was public health nurses. Again, there's been very substantial recruitment. 28,000 extra people recruited in the last 3 years.
Dr. Brian Stanley.
Thanks, Askan Cora. Same with the health issue, Tánaiste, just in relation to primary care services. We know how important they are in terms of keeping people out of hospital. And as we move towards implement Sláinte care, which has been moving way too slow, could I ask you in particular in relation to people in the east of County Laois on the Carlow, near the Carlow border, the people of Greycullen, Ballylinen, the Swan Dunan, Cretty Yard, Killeen, that depend on the centre in Greycullen, which actually sits right on the border in Oakley Estate. And what I want to ask you in particular, that before COVID there were a lot of services provided in that small centre. When COVID came, it closed obviously like a lot of other places, and a lot of those services haven't been re-established there. And what I want to ask you is that an example of what's happening is Greycullen in Carlow, Greycullen in County Laois, it's on the Laois-Carlow border. And what's happening is that people, elderly people and other people from that area, if they need an eye test, have to go to Athlone, which is a 230-kilometre round trip. If elderly people who need physiotherapy have to go to Portlaoise, they may not have a car, that's 85 kilometres. I'm asking you to bring this back to the Minister for Health to get that centre expanded and upgraded in Greycullen.
No, we're way up.
Is there a primary care centre?
Substantial amount of services were
provided there. I'll talk to the Minister for Health.
And I accept that it's not a primary care centre.
So I just want to find my own.
Yes, but what we do need is we need that health centre provided.
No, Deputy, thank you. Thank you.
I think, in my view, there's no excuse for services that existed pre-COVID not to be existing now. And that we're not. No, we're eating into the time. You had referenced that point. I agree with you on that point. But for some reason, some services were very slow coming back, even though resources weren't diluted. And there was a question mark over how that happened. And I'll talk to the Minister for Health in respect of what you raised.
Shortly with the business community in Drogheda to discuss the economic impact of the loss of the D Hotel of 21 million to the local economy. People in Drogheda remain extremely angry at this decision. The government needs to intervene and have a package for the tourists and the businesses in our town. But we need a moratorium on tourist accommodation being provided in the future in Drogheda for IPAS or BOTS applicants. We also need a ban on ground floor retail. We're losing a major pub, cost over 2 million refurbished recently. They're applying for IPAS accreditation. The business people in town are up in arms and they're very concerned about it. And further, Minister, and particularly addressing this to Minister Gorman, the fact is that you signed 500 beds for 2 years away to the D Hotel. The FARCERT issued last week for 465 beds at last. That means that the developers who own that hotel, those greedy developers, will have an additional 2 million quid in their back pocket as a result of beds that you signed up for that can never be filled because they've been never put in there. So your policy is a shambles in our town.
Deputy,
and you're throwing people out of tents at the moment all over the city of Dublin.
Deputy,
you need to re-examine this policy and bring ordinary people with you and not drive people into the arms of the extreme right wing who are getting oxygen from your actions.
Deputy O'Dowd, you've eaten into the time for the answer.
Thanks very much. The merchant pub, which I believe the Deputy is referring to, was offered for international protection accommodation some time ago. It was rejected by my department. I gathered the Deputy was highlighting that there is a potential that it may be re-offered. It hasn't been as yet. There's no offer currently with my department. I can't speak to what the owners will do in the future, but all I can speak to is that it was rejected for significant reasons the last time it came in, and that's where it is. So there is no current live offer for that public house there is no application within my department for that pub right now. The last application that we dealt with was rejected, and rejected for significant reasons. As you know, Deputy, none of us want to be in a situation where we're taking hotel accommodation. That's why we've published a comprehensive accommodation strategy, moving away from reliance on private providers, moving towards a core of state-provided accommodation. And just the last word, Count Corla, and in the short term, being able to provide accommodation for people who are in tents or rough sleeping at the moment, and another 109 people were offered accommodation today.
Okay, can we try and keep to the time limits? Or Deputy Martin Kenny.
Thank you, Lescan Corla. Taoiseach, I want to get clarity from the government in relation to the roads budget. We have reports that Transport Infrastructure Ireland funding for local authority projects has been stopped across the country in many cases, and I actually have a copy of emails here between the Irish Asphalt Producers Association and Transport Infrastructure Ireland in respect of this. They asked what was happening because some of their members were getting reports that local authorities were stalling projects that were going ahead. And in the reply they received, they said that they had indeed issued instructions last week for local authorities not to go to tender without prior approval from TII. Our commitment across the expenditure profile exceeds the funding available, and so unfortunately the consequence is that there will be a significant number of schemes that cannot progress to construction in the current year. Now, the reality here is that we have got a number of projects up and down the country where local authorities have funding in place, where the industry has prepared to provide the materials to do these projects across these roads, and now we find that the funding has been cut by central government. They say that this could be up to 40 million in funding, and we need to get clarity as to what's happening here, because everywhere we go in the country we're hearing people complaining about the state of the roads and danger on the roads, and we need to ensure that we have the funding in place to provide adequate improvement works.
I'm going to remind all members, it's 1 minute, it's up to 1 minute, it's one issue, it's on promised legislation and government policy, so please, let's cooperate together.
Is the Deputy talking about road maintenance or road projects? I mean,
we're having a question and response.
But it's very difficult to respond if we don't have clarity in terms of the ask. So I would simply say government has allocated increased funding for road maintenance and will be allocating additional sums for road maintenance as well. And so there shouldn't be an issue. I know, but look, different lobby groups come in, Deputy, and you know, the local authorities and TI and so on that are there to engage with groups and so forth. But there's been there has been inflation and so on, has eaten into a lot of projects and has increased the cost of projects and so on like that. But overall, the allocation has increased very substantially, both on TII projects and in terms of road maintenance.
I help the Pauline Tully.
There's a huge problem for medical card holders accessing dental services. Dentists are not taking on medical card holders, and people cannot afford to pay for dental treatment privately. And if people can't have their teeth taken care of, there are long-term consequences for their general health and indeed for their appearance. A review of the scheme was promised 2 years ago by the Minister for Health. And additional money isn't the only problem here. I mean, the scheme needs to be updated to include preventative care, which would prove cost-effective in the long term, and it's also having an impact on the provision of dentures. So can you please give me an update on where the review is at and what measures have been taken to address the backlog of people who are currently being denied dental care?
Well, fundamentally, as you know, the Minister did allocate additional funding in the interim period to try and deal with challenges in terms of public dental health services. There are challenges there, and there will continue to be. I will talk to the Minister in respect of the timeline around the review and where that is at the moment.
Taoiseach, you recently visited Lebanon, an area in danger of further escalation down to the genocidal slaughter by Israel in Gaza. Recognition of Palestine by Ireland and others, very positive, needs to be followed up with real sanctions on Israel. Taoiseach, can I get an update on the quest for justice for Private Sean Rooney following your interactions with the Lebanese authorities? You have spoken about your concerns at the slow pace, and I know that you've said we need to leave no stone unturned. So if we could get an update, I would really appreciate it.
I did meet with the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Lebanon in respect of the case, and also present was a lawyer from the Department of Defence in Lebanon, because the Minister was in hospital with COVID. But the lawyer was very conversant with the case. But I made it clear in no uncertain terms about our real grave concern at the delay, first of all, in terms of the progress on the case and certain aspects of it. And notwithstanding the separation of powers in terms of their judicial system and so forth, pressed the need for us to have a very clear process, and that would be transparent, but also that it would be far more timely than it has been to date.
Brendan Griffin.
Bus Éireann, as you may know, don't allow drivers over 70 to operate on their school routes or on their passenger services. Other private operators can do this and do this safely. And in the area where I come from, we have many operators on behalf of Bus Éireann operating school services who are having difficulty finding drivers, and yet we have many people who are 70 or just over 70 who want to drive the school buses but who aren't permitted. Now, we know lots of people who are of that age and who are in great condition, and 70 is the new 60. It's not like it used to be. So I'm asking, maybe could we review this and ensure that there's at least people are given an individual opportunity to be clinically assessed rather than a blanket ban at 70. And we have lots of colleagues around this house as well who are over 70 and they're flying fit and they're in great form and they'll be well able to do the job. So I think the same should apply on a case-by-case basis for people to drive school buses and drivers who are badly needed.
Yeah, I agree with the Deputy. I spoke to the Minister for Transport on this, and